Greetings, remote logged-in guest. Lansing am I. Lansing remembers. What files would you like to access today? History of the Forefather Conflict. The Revenge March. Accessing. Audio lecture by Jean-Rodrigue Mardin. Beginning. Allô. Bonsoir, mes amis. My name is Jean-Rodrigue Mardin. It is a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I hope that my memories and my conclusions can give you, now that we are far removed from the March to Detroit, the conflict you call the Forefather War, a sense of the trials and great hardships that your ancestors endured. In the year 2220, I was a young boy of 14. I had been drafted into the Communication Corps of His Majesty Vanron des Marais, King of Quebec and its territories, l'Armée Grande Impériale, and God willing, that is the last I will ever have to call that bloodthirsty, avaricious idiot pomp of a man, His Majesty, for the rest of this presentation. You may have seen the protesters outside, no? I hope they did not cause you much difficulty. They are upset that I, a veteran of that army your ancestors fought so violently, should speak to you. But I believe that what I have to tell is a message vital to all Ganders and those that love liberty. Because fraternity, equity, and liberty, they have not been present in the Monarchie du Quebec since at least the time of my grandfather. And if they are going to bloom here in what was once called the Great Northern Republic, then it falls upon us all to protect them. The protesters outside are upset that while conscripted in arms to the king, I did my duty. To them I would ask for the understanding that when called upon by his country, a man must obey, and that those of us in the l'Armée Impériale, we were obeying our orders at the point of our officers' bayonets. Now that I am an old man with 89 years of bitterly learned lessons, I wish to impart them to you, that a great disaster may be prevented, a disaster that I see that greatly resembles the campaign that I mentioned, but far worse than the destruction and cost of life that might be coming. To understand my fear, you must understand what it was like to fight in that campaign and in those conditions. Picture, if you will, two lines. Place these lines in your mind upon a blank sheet of paper, and place them at opposite ends of that paper. This represents the task of all militaries. You must get your line to the other side of the paper, while the opposing line attempts to stop you. Between you is a great expanse, made all the longer by the aggressive defense your opponents will surely mount, a landscape filled with the craters from artillery, lanes of barbed wire, and above the cold trenches, the deadly flight of lead bumblebees. The plans our generals had drawn up for our campaign were simple. We would begin with a fearsome artillery barrage, which you call the lead rain. The great guns would first hurl high explosive and EMP shells into the fortified positions that we are about to assault. The explosives would soften the fortifications, and the EMP shells were hoped to short out the power armor that we expected to engage. Then the guns would shift to gas canisters, the goal of which was to incapacitate the unarmored infantry. And finally, a layer of smoke would be spread across the battlefield to shield our own infantry from the fire, and in a great rush, we would speed towards our predetermined rally point. This would be done behind a wall of our legionnaires' Imperial power armor suits, carrying heavy weapons and flamers to help clear out the fortifications. The power armor would be our vanguard. And once we reached our first rally point, and we'd taken care of all the troops that were within, we would muster our forces, and the process would be repeated. What was hoped to be a gradual process that would constantly alternate between the lead rain, the rush, and then rally, the lead rain, the rush, and the rally, and so on and so on. As I said, it was a simple plan, but you will find that in warfare, simple plans are often the best. And we had good intelligence about how the Michigan militia and regulars were going to resist us. The finest to be had, we were told. We had marked out our advance, figured out our logistics, and even had our allies that would be attacking from the north and by the sea to aid in our assault. And there is still much talk today in Quebec City that had it not been for the Ottawa Navy's incompetence, the outcome of the war would have been in our favor. That is to say, the Quebecois. But I do not believe it. For despite our general's plans and careful calculations, despite the fact that our artillery was on target and our attack plan sound, the MMR was simply not where they were supposed to be. We were detecting no radio traffic as we advanced, and we had seen only token resistance. And this was very emboldening at first. Everywhere we passed, we came across burning farms and advanced positions that had already been assaulted and taken, and we cheered thinking that our foxtails, our advanced scouts and special operators, had done this for us. It would be after the war that I would learn exactly what had happened, and what all those coded transmissions I had received to our generals really meant. For you see, the first depravity of the conflict was simply this. The King of Quebec and all of its territories, realizing he did not have the force of arms on his own to take Detroit, had persuaded every raider gang east of our territory to take safe passage through our lands under the cover of darkness, enter ahead of time before us, and terrorize and raid the local populations to prevent partisans from blocking our way. He had promised them land, loot, and that after the war was over, they'd even be allowed to keep territories there in the lands they had raided, set themselves up as new feudal despots. You will find, my friends, it is never hard to find a man willing to fight for money. And it's definitely not difficult to find one that will commit atrocities if he gets to keep the loot. As the MMR retreated, leaving behind mines and booby traps, their snipers would pick shots at our officers. The regulars would pop up from time to time and fire a rocket or two at our power armor, slowing our advance. And this gradually reduced the number of our Legionnaires' power armor suits. But we weren't worried yet. We were very foolish. And I have heard it said that along the flanks of our advance there were places where the MMR troops made greater resistance before eventually being run over or having to retreat, but of this I saw none as I was in the middle of the vanguard. Your strikes and your aircraft did not strafe us, though they did at times strike behind us to try to slow our advance with a dive bomb attack upon a supply cart. In retrospect, the defense your officers planned should have been obvious to our generals. It was a tactic as old as the Mongols, as old as Marathon. But, though we have one of the grandest libraries in the world, our generals are not prone to read. For you see, the MMR's strategy was to resist at the edges of our advance and funnel us all towards the center, pinning us against Detroit. Our commanders misread this at the time as the MMR being unable to hold this ground. We were so expertly outfoxed. Detroit is still held to this day by a violent and efficient artificial intelligence named Sagittarius. Pinned between its robots and the MMR forces, we were unaware that we were walking into an envelopment. I imagine it must have been very much what the Persians felt as Militates and his hoplites surrounded them, bit by bit as they win, not realizing they are ultimately putting another nail in the coffin of their doom. Our generals, so swayed by the lure of the great green jewel, were blinded to what was happening. When we entered the eerily preserved streets of that blighted ground, the automated devils attacked us. Some Quebecois by the conspiracy theory that a missive or a deal was struck between Sagittarius and the MMR, and I have not seen anything to prove that or disprove it. As you had several very cunning heroes during that conflict, it is something that might be probable, but there is no proof of it, and I do not deal in conspiracy theories being a historian. I deal in facts. Yet I feel I should mention it, for it is a matter of our history that the belief is held. We found ourselves blighted what was essentially 3 divisions of automated robots, and this began to occupy all of our general's attentions. It allowed your MMR forces to give more attention to their own positioning, maneuvering around, and also allowed them to make spearheads against the Forefather assault and the Ottoman Navy, as well as the Ontarian attempt to pincer them. There was a sense of a time amongst our Quebecois lines that we were invincible. The robots kept coming, and we kept expending ammunition and destroying them. Their only virtue seemed to be in their numbers. But again, history should have been a warning. As Napoleon said, quantity is a quality all of its own. Our generals were largely blind to the fact that this was a stalling tactic, and that the counterattack was coming. 4 days after we were stalled at Detroit, I heard on the radios that the Brotherhood of Steel, which had at that point been helping the MMR to stall the Ottoman and Ontarian advances, had attacked the Lansing Congress. Though my fellows celebrated the news, I remember myself feeling a sense of dread. For until that point, though we Quebecois had our own quibbles with the Brotherhood, we had held them to be an honorable institution. Quebecois society is based upon a feudal ideal, and the Brotherhood was seen by many of us as being a type of knighthood. To see men and women that we had held to be honorable and the virtues of chivalry suddenly be reduced to nothing more than avaricial and pestiferous rogues, it was disheartening to me. I was young. It was my first war. They had been allied to the MMR for all of 10 days, the Brotherhood, and now they were trying to perform a coup d'etat. But we had no time to ponder our predicament. For when I was not always at the front, being a radio operator, I would often be sent to the rear to coordinate with the suppliers and the quartermasters and bring up the much-needed materiel, as well as confirm our plans for advance. As my army was beginning to dig into a trench line, a picture of what was happening was forming in my head. A picture that was at odds with what I was being told by my superiors. Between being frustrated with my quartermasters who just wanted me to sign everything out in triplicate and running back and forth in the lines, I began to see that we were not going to be able to advance. We needed too much. We were expending too much. And we were too stalled and bogged down. Worse, to change orders or plans required many bureaucratic niceties be obeyed so that everyone's honor was preserved. My intention is not to present the Quebecois Army Imperiale as being inefficient. There are some things it did very well. But it was stricken by a kind of bureaucratic cholera. This picture in my mind that began to form, that same day that we heard about the Lansing ambush, it crystallized. For if the Brotherhood succeeded in taking Lansing, it could only mean more trouble for us. As it was, we were embattled with every able male and female volunteer of your republic. If the Brotherhood took the capital, it would only cement your entire population's ire. A population that in the north is composed of expert marksmen and country folk who would make a fearsome guerrilla force. In the west, it is populated by strong and determined men and women who are not used to being told what to do. In the south, with expert scouts who have the Kickapoo. And in the east, where we were fighting, the dogged sock defenders. There were also troubling things I heard being spread about our foxtails. I heard rumors that they were taking scalps. That they were doing this mostly to the sock that they were fighting. We also heard rumors that they were engaged in raping and murder of children, and none of us wanted to believe it, As I said, it was my first war. I was more prone to believe it than others, for I sometimes saw foxtails making deals with men who I did not recognize as being part of the army, and whose role was never explained to us, other than they were mercenaries. But from the twitchy look of their demeanor and the bags under their eyes, they appeared like raiders to me. The signs of drug addiction and psychosis were there for all to see. In addition to this, the foxtails seemed intent on keeping me away from these carts that were marked with a biohazard sign and radioactive warnings. It was explained to me that these were fission batteries for our own robots and power armor. Well, who was I to say otherwise? So as you can see, the image that was forming in my mind was composed of the things I was told and the things I could see, and the war between them. And gradually, as more evidence came in daily, I came to the conclusion that we were doomed. I'm sure there's some historian somewhere saying that, well, it's hindsight. Hindsight's always 20/20, but no. I remember the exact moment I thought it. For I could see that if we did not soon gain a foothold in the city of Detroit, or move to a better position, we were going to be enveloped. We could not advance under the hail of laser fire from the robots, and despite how many we killed, they just kept coming. And our attempts to dig our way into the city were met by a new robotic horror. I believe some of your soldiers refer to it as an asphaltaconda, a burrowing robot much like a snake that would spring up from under our engineers and eviscerate them. Our commanders finally decided that what they would have to do is double up upon the bombardments. And I worked out at that moment that we were expending so many shells that when the MMR finally arrived, we would have scant anything to hurl at them. Now, remember what I said at the beginning of this presentation about the lines? You see, our generals are smart enough not to order us to advance under the fire we were receiving from the robots, but they were stymied about how to break that distance. A situation that's not unheard of in military history. There are times when technology of defense and offense equal out, and the defender has a massive advantage. Now, had our generals simply abandoned the assault upon Detroit and marched us north to the coast, boarded us on boats and sent us across the water to the lower peninsula, the Lansing War may have had a completely different outcome. But they did not. And so, unchallenged by your coastal services, we lost the coast. I'm sorry, I meant to say your coastal services were unchallenged, and so we lost the coast. And secretly they landed 3 divisions north of us, of which we were completely unaware. And yes, I'm referring to the famous trio of divisions that were led by Eurydice J and his power-armored knights, the men that had defected to the MMR cause from the Brotherhood of Steel. And he brought with them all the robots the Brotherhood had left behind in that battle as well. The news first came to my position on the 6th day of the siege of Detroit, that we were to begin a retreat. At first I could not believe it. I read the message twice. I ran to our generals and handed them the communication. I have never seen a more dumbstruck-stricken group of men and officers. These men, playing cards far removed from the battlefield and sipping sherry as other men died, were discussing some novel or what they would do when they took Detroit. Now here was an order from the king to retreat. When I stepped out of the command tent, I remember seeing activity. The word was spreading, and the carts that had the strange markings were being hitched up, and the foxtails were working them. I had no time to think about this, about why we were suddenly changing batteries and robots and power armor, when surely it had to be maintained every day. My duties were at the radio station. Quickly ran back to my post, and more reports began filtering in. Various contacts with the advancing force of the militia and regulars were coming in upon us now. They were no more now than a few miles away. The army packed up as much gear as it could, and in an hour we began marching away. And as we marched away, we could hear the buzzing engines of the Shrike drones watching us. An hour after the first contact had been reported to me, I began noticing that some of my scouts, I say my scouts because of the camaraderie of the time, but the Army's scouts, were failing to report in on time. We were losing men. We were losing our eyes. Men began filtering into the column that we were marching in from the north of us, some also from the south. They had a wild look in their eye, some bearing wounds. Many of these men had a wild look about them, and badly painted or drawn versions of the lily on their armor. I guess these were the more civilized raider gangs. The strafing runs came next. Your aircraft, we commonly refer to them as those damn mosquitoes, began pecking at us. Bombs were dropped on carts, though we would have even less ammunition when the big fight came. And the artillery carts were clearly their main prize. We fired at them from the ground as best we could, and perhaps we may have even downed a few. But in general, a man on the ground is no match for one in the air. The columns now developed gaps and stragglers, and I could hear rifle shots of your Spartans and your Socs occasionally taking someone from us. I would hear the occasional scream of a fallen comrade and have no time to stop to help him up. We had not the time to remove even the bodies of any of the fallen from units that were trying to join us. I noticed that foxtails were starting to lag behind us. When I asked the general about this, he said that they were going to lay ambushes and guerrilla warfare-style delaying actions to try to give our army a chance to regroup. I am ashamed to say I was grateful at the time. For now that I had seen some of death and of war, it justly terrified me. Now our army passed through country that we had advanced through previously before, in great victory and euphoria. It appeared now as a burning waste. Apparently the raiders that had been promised it had been busy looting, destroying. Nor was it secure. Partisans would peck at us. The ground would turn against us from the roughness of it, from craters and other attacks. We began leaving Brahmin carts behind. As you can see, by the time we reached the blue line, the area that we had already begun some of our entrenchments on when we had first started the war as a fallback area, the Quebecois army was demoralized and exhausted. Many of us all but fell asleep in the entrenchments when we arrived, and I remember having just enough time to get a blessed cup of chicory coffee when I heard the warning whistles sound. Great green balls of glowing plasma began to light up the sky and fall upon us. Your ingenious engineers had discovered a way to mix plasma with a gel, allowing them to lob plasma much like an artillery shell. We were being shelled from the coastal services, and we had no response to it, our own guns not being ready. This fire was inaccurate because of the great length at which the plasma was having to be fired, and it was newness as a weapon. Many people were still just trying to figure out how to work it. But that wasn't the point. Many of our men ran. Some of them I remember seeing shot in the back as officers tried to control the rout. The intent was to demoralize, to finally break our will to fight. And it came darn near. Had it not been for our officers' bayonets, I think it would have succeeded. Above us, we saw your airplanes patrolling, probably radioing back how to adjust fire, how to coordinate. And in that weird light of the green from the plasma balls, the sky seemed to change. And off in the distance, I saw a strange green haze, like a fog creeping along the ground. And many of us believed at the time this was some secondary effect of the weapon we were being shelled by. I would come later to learn the horror of what it was the foxtails had done, and I think that I will stop there for a moment. And we will return as I tell you the rest of what happened at the Blue Line. End of part 1 of the recording. Part 2 to start in a few moments. Accessing data.